In this lesson, I'm going to speak about specific form methods that are important to know. The reason I'm going to talk about methods of forms is they're slightly different than other objects, especially objects on a form. If we look at a command button, for instance, and look at its event procedures, it's got specific events for specific actions that occur, but it's got one event for the action. The same for text box. It's got different things that can happen. We can update the information, hit the enter key, that triggers the after update. Before update is when we first start typing things in. We've got events if we hit a key while we're in the text box, and so forth. You may have learned about some of these different events when you went through your introduction to Microsoft Access course. But for all of them, there is one event for a specific action. Forms, however, are slightly different. It does have events that would only trigger under certain circumstances, but there's also a series of events that happen consecutively, one right after another, with specific actions. That is when a form first begins, and when you're done with the form and you hit the red X to close it. When a form opens or when a form closes, it actually breaks up its processing into three different steps. Now, the reason I'm going over that is to understand what is occurring in those steps, to know what you can or can't do, and what you would have access to in adding code to those event procedures. So when a form opens, as I said, it causes three different events to happen in sequence. The first event is the open event. What the open event does is it draws the form. It draws the outline of the form based on how big it is, and then it puts all the different objects in there, whatever the title might be, all the different control objects like a label, a text box, a command button, a list box, sets the colors, all of that. So it basically draws a picture of the form. Now what that means is in our code for the open event procedure, we would know about any of the objects because they're drawn first. Remember, Access will do the default operation of an event procedure first before any additional code that has been written in the VBA editor window for that event. So the form gets drawn first. That means we can refer to any of the form objects by name. However, the objects don't hold anything worthwhile. What does that mean? There's no data. That gets handled in the next event that occurs in sequence, and that is the load event. So the form is drawn first, then the load event brings in the data. Whatever the record source of the form is, be it a table or a query, it loads that data. It puts the default value in for any of the objects that are there. So if you want to work actually with the data that's contained inside the form, you must work with code added to the load event because the data wouldn't be there in the open event. Then the last event that happens is the activate. What the activate event does very simply is determines what is the first object in tab order that gets the focus and puts the cursor there. It basically says now the form is ready for all of its processing. It's not common in the industry to add code to the activate event. Usually if somebody is doing something when a form first starts, it's either attached to the open event or to the load event. Now when a form closes, it works in reverse. So since activate was the last process, deactivate is the first one that's done when a form closes, and it just loses all focus. So whatever was the last item where the cursor was, the lost focus event for that object would happen in the deactivate. All right? Then it would do the unload event, which frees up the data. So clearly you don't want to put in any processing that would require referring to data in the form in the unload event procedure, because the unload process would happen first prior to any code you type. So all the data's gone. Doesn't help. Then the last event that occurs is the close event, which clears all of the objects from the screen and removes it. So by the time your code will be active in the close event, nothing is there except the form itself, none of the objects or anything. The only time in the industry people tend to put code with the close event is if we're changing the next thing that's done. This form is closing, and instead of going back to the immediately previous window that was active before this form opened, we might change control to something different. That's about the only thing that's usually done in the close event. So that lets you know the different methods that happen for forms, so you understand the order and what's available to you when you're putting in additional code inside of an event procedure for those events.